"Sign it," her father said, "or we lose everything by morning." Clara's hand didn't shake when she picked up the pen. It shook after alone in the hallway back against the wall, the sound of her own breathing too loud in her ears. She had just signed her name to a marriage with a man an entire town called dangerous. A man she had never met. A man people warned her about in the same voice they used for bad weather and worse news. She was not property, she knew that. But the paper said otherwise. And she had signed it anyway. If this story already hits something in your chest, subscribe right now. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far Clara's story travels. The train arrived in Mill Haven just past 7 in the evening. Clara felt it before she heard it, that particular kind of silence that tells you a town has already made up its mind about you. She stood at the window of the last passenger car and watched the platform come into view. A handful of people stood waiting for arrivals. Women in heavy winter coats. Men with hats pulled low. A child clinging to her mother's skirt. None of them were looking at the train. All of them were looking at one man. He stood apart from the crowd. Tall. Still as a fence post in the wind. A long coat over his shoulders and a lantern in his right hand, even though the platform lamps were already lit. I was not looking at them either. He was looking at the train. More specifically, Clara realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana cold, he was looking at the window where she stood. She stepped back from the glass. Her heart knocked once hard against the inside of her chest. So that's him. She had received exactly 2 pieces of information about Ethan Walker before boarding this train. The first came from her father's lawyer, a thin man with ink-stained fingers who had handed her the marriage contract with the same expression he used when delivering bad news about debts. "He's a ranch owner," the lawyer had said. "Substantial property, Montana territory. He has agreed to cover the outstanding obligations in exchange for the arrangement." "What kind of man is he?" Clara had asked. The lawyer looked at her over his spectacles for a moment. Then he looked back down at his papers. "The kind who gets what he needs," he said. That was the first piece of information. The second came from a woman she met on the train, a Mrs. Henderson traveling back to Missoula, who had recognized the name Walker on Clara's travel papers when she dropped them in the aisle. The woman's face had done something strange. Not quite fear. Something closer to pity. "Walker," Mrs. Henderson had said carefully, handing the papers back. "Ethan Walker, from up near the Blackwater Ridge area." "Yes," Clara said. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a long moment. Then she patted Clara's hand with a firmness that felt more like warning than comfort. "You keep your wits about you, dear," she said. "That's all I'll say." Clara had spent the next 4 hours trying to decide what exactly that meant. She gathered her things slowly. 1 leather suitcase, a small traveling case with her papers. The wool coat she'd had for 3 winters, now repaired twice at the left cuff. The other passengers filed out ahead of her. She waited until the car was empty. Then she stood up, straightened her back, a habit she'd learned from her mother, who had once told her that a woman who stands straight is a woman who hasn't given up yet, and she walked to the door. The cold hit her like a hand to the face. She stepped down onto the platform. The crowd had already thinned. Reunions were happening around her, embraces, voices, the shuffling of bags. Normal life. The kind of ordinary warmth she had not been part of in so long, it felt like something from another woman's story. She looked toward where she had seen him. He was still standing in the same place. He had not moved toward the crowd. He had not joined any of the greetings happening around him. I was simply watching her walk toward him. Up close, Ethan Walker was not what the lawyer's careful neutrality or Mrs. Henderson's warning had prepared her for. He was perhaps 10 years older than her. Not old, but worn in the way that outdoor men get worn, not from weakness, but from weather, from work, from years of doing something that cost more than it paid. His face was not unkind. That was the first thing she noticed, and it confused her because she had been preparing herself for something harder. He was not smiling. But he was not cold either. He was simply present. Looking at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to understand, not something he is trying to own. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The wind cut across the platform. Then Ethan Walker did something Clara had not expected. He set down the lantern at his feet, removed his coat from his own shoulders, and placed it around hers. It was heavy. It smelled like horses and pine smoke and cold air. It was warm in the way that only a garment worn by a living body can be warm. Clara stood very still. She did not know what to do with kindness that arrived without asking for anything. "You're safe with me," he said. His voice was quiet. Not soft exactly. There was too much weight in it for soft. But steady. The kind of voice that does not change depending on who is listening. Clara looked up at him. For one strange, untethered moment, she almost believed him. Then she remembered who he was and what she was and why both of them were standing on this freezing platform. "I don't know you," she said. "No." Ethan agreed. "You don't." He picked up his lantern. He picked up her suitcase without being asked. "Wagons this way," he said, and started walking. Clara stood there for 2 more seconds. Then she followed him, because she had no other place to go. The wagon ride took nearly an hour. Clara sat beside him on the bench, the borrowed coat still around her shoulders, and watched the land open up around them as the town lights fell away behind. She had expected silence. She got silence for the first few miles, but it was not the silence of a man who was cold or dismissive. It was the silence of a man who did not feel the need to fill empty space with empty words. After a while he spoke. "Were you fed on the train?" "Pardon." "On the train," he said. "Did you eat?" Yes, I had something earlier." He nodded once. "Martha will have food waiting anyway. She always does." "Who is Martha?" "Runs the house. Has since before I took over the ranch." Clara absorbed that. "How long have you run it?" 7 years. "And before that?" A small pause. "Before that?" Ethan said, "It was my father's." The way he said it, not elaborating but not flinching. Either told Clara there was a whole story inside those 4 words that she did not yet have access to. She did not push. Another mile passed. "People in town," she said carefully. "They looked at you." "People in town always look at me." "They looked at you the way people look at something they're afraid of." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "And you're not going to explain that." "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight you're tired and cold, and you've had enough to carry for one day." Clara turned to look at him. In profile in the dark, with the lantern swinging from the front hook of the wagon, she could see the line of his jaw. The tension there, not anger, she thought. More like a man who was used to holding things in place by sheer will. "You're going to have to explain it eventually," she said. "I know," he said again, "because I need to understand who I'm living with." He turned and looked at her then. Just briefly, just a glance before his eyes went back to the road. "That's fair," he said simply. And somehow that answer, that simple undefended agreement, was more disarming than any reassurance would have been. The ranch house was larger than she expected. Not grand. Nothing about it was trying to impress anyone, but solid, carefully built. The kind of structure that had been repaired and reinforced over decades by hands that cared about the work. Inside, Martha was waiting. She was a round-faced woman in her 60s, with white hair braided down her back, and an expression that had clearly seen enough of life to be unimpressed by most of it. But her eyes were sharp, and when they landed on Clara, they did not contain pity. They contained something closer to recognition. "Sit down," Martha said, and pointed at the kitchen table like it was an order, which it was. Clara sat. Food appeared. Soup. Bread. Coffee that was too strong and too hot, and exactly what she needed. Martha moved around the kitchen without speaking. Ethan had gone to see to the horses. The house settled around Clara, like something that was deciding whether to accept her. After a few minutes, Martha sat down across from her. "You look like you haven't slept in 3 days," the older woman said. 2, Clara said. "But close enough." Martha looked at her steadily. "You scared?" Clara wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Is that a test?" "No," Martha said. It's a question. Clara thought about it honestly. I don't know what I am, she said. I thought I'd be more frightened by now. I kept waiting for it on the train. But mostly I just feel empty. Martha nodded slowly, like that was the answer she expected. Empty is better than broken, the older woman said. Empty can be filled. Clara didn't respond to that. She wasn't sure yet if she believed it. He's not what they say, Martha added after a moment. Not defensively, just plainly the way you say something you've had to say too many times and no longer expect people to immediately accept. What do they say? Clara asked. That he's cruel, that he's cold, that women don't last long around him. Martha's expression didn't change. Irene Calloway started that particular story because he wouldn't sell her husband a piece of lower pasture land they'd been after for years. The Durkins added to it because he filed legal papers against their grazing on his property without permission. And Charles Whitlock. She stopped herself. Whitlock, Clara repeated. Something moved across Martha's face, a tightening. He's not someone to discuss tonight, Martha said. Tonight you eat, you sleep. Tomorrow you see the ranch in daylight, and you make up your own mind. She stood up, set a clean towel on the counter. Your room's at the top of the stairs, second door. There's a bolt on the inside. She said that last part, without emphasis, without drama. Just information. But the fact that she mentioned it at all, that there was a bolt that Clara might want to use, it lodged somewhere in Clara's chest like a splinter. She was in a strange man's house. She had a piece of paper that said she was his wife. She had nothing else. Clara finished the soup, stood up, carried her own bowl to the wash basin because it seemed wrong not to. Then she climbed the stairs and found the second door. She bolted it from the inside. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time in the dark, her coat still on her traveling case in her lap. She had not cried on the train. She did not cry now. She just sat with the silence and the strange solidness of the house around her, and the sentence that was still echoing somewhere in the back of her mind. You're safe with me. She pressed her fingers together. She had no reason to believe that. She also could not explain why some quiet, stubborn piece of her wanted to. Morning came gray and cold. Clara had slept, which surprised her because she had not expected to. The bed was firm, and the blankets were heavy, and the house had held the cold out just enough that she had finally, sometime past midnight, let go of the vigilance she'd been carrying for weeks and slipped under. She woke to the smell of coffee. She dressed quickly. Boots. Her second best dress, which was also her only dress that hadn't been pawned or traded in the months since the ranch was taken. She unbolted the door. The house was already awake. She heard voices from the kitchen. Martha's low and brisk, and another voice younger, which she discovered belonged to a boy of about 14 named Will, who appeared to be simultaneously eating a biscuit, pulling on a boot, and trying to explain something about a fence post to Martha, who was not listening. Will looked up when Clara appeared in the doorway. He stared at her for a moment, with the completely unguarded curiosity of a teenager. You're the new missus, he said. Will, Martha said in a tone that was not quite a reprimand. I'm Clara, Clara said. Will Marsh, the boy said. He stuck out the hand that wasn't holding the biscuit. Clara shook it. Mr. Walker said to tell you breakfast is yours whenever you want it, Martha said, already turning back to the stove. He's out with the hands, fence line. He'll be back mid-morning. Clara poured herself coffee, sat at the table. How many people work on the ranch? She asked. 6 full-time, Will said, apparently deciding she was more interesting than the fence post problem. Plus me and my uncle during spring. Old Pete's been here since before Mr. Walker's father died. He says he'll be here when everyone else is gone too. The boy grinned. He says that about everything, though. He's not wrong about much, Martha observed. Is the ranch large? Clara asked. 3,000 acres, give or take, Will said. Cattle mostly, some horses. East pastures where they keep the young ones. He paused. You ride. I used to, Clara said. Her father had taught her, before everything changed. Before the creditors came and the ranch was dismantled piece by piece, and the horses were the first things to go because horses were valuable and debt was immediate. Mr. Walker's got a gray mare that doesn't let anyone near her. Will offered as though this were excellent news. But she didn't bite you yesterday, right? She bites everyone. She bit Thomas Greer twice. Will, Martha said again. I arrived after dark, Clara said. I didn't see the horses. You'll see her today. Will's expression suggested he was looking forward to whatever happened next. Clara finished her coffee. I'd like to see the whole ranch, she said, if that's all right. Martha set a plate in front of her without comment. Eggs, biscuits. It's your home, the older woman said. Clara looked at the plate. Your home. 2 words that should have been simple. 2 words that should have made something in her loosen, soften, settle. Instead, they sat in her chest like stones, because she didn't know yet if that was true. She didn't know what this place was, or who this man was, or what exactly she had agreed to when she signed her name on that document in the lawyer's cold office, while her father sat in the corner and could not look at her. She knew only that she was here, and that somewhere on this ranch a man was mending a fence in the morning cold, and he had given her his coat without asking for anything back, and he had not locked her room from the outside. She picked up her fork. She would have to decide what to do with those facts. She found him at the east fence line at 9:30. She had asked Will to point her in the right direction, and the boy had done so with the enthusiasm of someone who expected interesting things to happen and wanted to be in the vicinity when they did. Ethan was working with 2 other men, older, weathered, moving with the practiced economy of men who have done the same physical work for decades. They were replacing a damaged section of fence. Digging, setting posts. The work was cold and hard, and they were doing it without complaint. Ethan saw her coming while she was still 50 yards off. He did not stop working, but he watched her approach with that same steady attention she had noticed the night before, like a man who took the world seriously and paid it the compliment of actually looking at it. She stopped at the edge of the work area. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He straightened, said something to one of the other men low, she couldn't hear it, and came toward her, pulling off one work glove. "I wanted to see the ranch," she said. Martha said. "Of course," he said. No hesitation. "Where do you want to start?" She had expected him to redirect her, to say he was busy, or to assign Will to show her around, or to find some polite way to keep her from wandering too freely on his property. He did none of those things. He walked beside her. He showed her the cattle pastures, which were larger than anything her father had managed. The barn, which was meticulously maintained in a way that told her either Ethan himself oversaw it, or he employed someone who cared about the work the way he did. The storage houses, the equipment sheds. He named things without embellishment. Answered her questions directly. Did not condescend, did not oversimplify, did not treat her curiosity like something he needed to manage. When she asked about the herd numbers, he gave them to her. When she asked about the season's projected income. He hesitated for just a moment, not defensively, more like he was recalibrating an expectation, and then he told her. "You know about ranching," he said after a while. Not quite a question. "My father had a ranch," she said. "A smaller one. I helped manage the book since I was 16. Something shifted in his expression. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was there. "The accounts here are a mess," he said flatly. "I'm better with cattle than paperwork." "I just," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. "I'm not criticizing," she said. "I'm offering." A beat of silence. "I'll get you access to the ledgers," he said. It was not a warm statement. It was not romantic. It was not even particularly personal. But it was something she had not received in a very long time. It was trust. She was 3 hours into the ranch ledgers when she found the first thing that didn't make sense. It was a payment, a large one, made 18 months ago to a company called Whitlock Land and Agricultural Holdings. Her hand stopped moving. She had heard that name last night. Martha had started to say something about it, then stopped herself. Clara looked at the entry more carefully. The amount was significant, nearly a quarter of the ranch's liquid operating budget at the time. And beside it in Ethan's cramped handwriting were the words, "Disputed C correspondence file." She looked for the correspondence file. It wasn't where it should have been. She searched the shelf above the desk. Not there. She checked the lower drawer. Not there either. She sat back in the chair, the ledger open in her lap, and looked at the missing space where a file should have been. Disputed C correspondence file. A quarter of a year's operating budget. A name that made Martha go quiet. Clara closed the ledger carefully. She replaced it on the shelf exactly as she'd found it. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the gray winter sky over the mountains. She had signed a marriage document to a man she didn't know. She was living in a house she had been in for less than 24 hours. And she had just found something that told her the story of Ethan Walker was considerably more complicated than a man with a bad reputation and a cold manner. The question was not whether there was a story buried in those ledgers. The question was what that story would cost her when she finally understood it. That evening she found Ethan in the barn. He was alone with the gray mare, the one Will had described as untouchable. The horse was not biting him. She was not pulling away. She was standing with her head low, and Ethan's hand was moving slowly along her neck, and whatever he was saying to the animal was too quiet for Clara to catch from the doorway. She watched him for a moment without speaking. This was not the man Mrs. Henderson's voice had warned her about. This was not what the town's eyes had told her to expect. She stepped into the barn. The mare's ears went up. She shifted. Ethan's hand stilled for a moment. Then he looked toward the door. "She doesn't like strangers," he said quietly. More statement than warning. "I noticed," Clara said. She stopped well short of the horse's stall. "Will said she bites." "She does, when she's afraid." "She's not afraid of you." "Not anymore," he said. He turned back to the horse. "Took most of last winter." Clara moved a few steps closer slowly, the way she'd learned as a girl. No sudden movements, let the animal decide the terms. The mare watched her. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "You can ask me anything," Ethan said. "I may not answer tonight." "The Whitlock payment," she said. "In the ledgers, 18 months ago." His hand stopped. The mare felt it and shifted again. Ethan resumed the slow movement along the horse's neck. But his back had changed a tension there that hadn't been a moment ago. "I didn't say anything about the ledgers being off limits," Clara said carefully. "But if they are..." "They're not," he said. "Then what was that payment?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might give her the same answer he'd given on the wagon, not tonight, and she was already preparing herself for that, already deciding she could be patient. But then he spoke. "Charles Whitlock is a businessman," he said. "He buys land, or he takes it, whichever is easier. He took land from you. He tried to. He's been trying for 6 years. Ethan's voice was flat, factual, not angry, or rather, the anger was so far underneath the flatness that you could only hear it if you were listening for it. The payment in the ledger was part of a settlement dispute. He manufactured a debt. Said my father had borrowed from one of his holding companies before he died. The paperwork looked legitimate. Was it? No, Ethan said. But proving that takes time and money and lawyers, and while you're doing all of that, a man like Whitlock keeps moving, files other claims, puts pressure on other people. He knows that most folks will give up before the fight is over. But you didn't. No, he said simply. I didn't. Clara stood in the barn doorway with the cold coming in behind her, and the lamplight making long shadows across the straw. Is that why the town? She started. Whitlock has friends in this county, Ethan said. Men who owe him favors or money or both. When he decided he wanted this land, part of the plan was making sure nobody around here would side with me. He paused. He's very good at that. At choosing which stories to tell and which to let die. So the reputation is his work, Ethan said. Mostly. He turned around then, looked at her across the barn. I'm not telling you this so you'll take my side, he said. I'm telling you because you asked and you deserve a straight answer. She looked at him. You said you might not answer tonight. I changed my mind. Why? He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression, not quite vulnerable, but close to it. The look of a man who has learned to keep his walls high, but occasionally unexpectedly finds himself standing in a doorway without them. "Because you went looking at the ledgers," he said. "Not because you were suspicious. Because you genuinely wanted to help." Clara wasn't sure what to say to that. "And because," he added more quietly, "nobody has done that in a long time." The mare exhaled, shook her head once. The lamp flickered. Clara stood in the cold doorway of a Montana barn, in the first winter of a marriage she hadn't chosen, listening to a man who had every reason not to trust anyone, explain himself to her with no performance and no pretense. She thought about what Martha had said the night before. Empty can be filled. She didn't know yet what was happening here. She didn't know if she trusted him. She didn't know if trust was even the right word for the strange, careful thing that was building itself in the space between them. But she knew one thing. Charles Whitlock was a name she was going to need to learn more about, and she was going to need to do it before he came looking for what he hadn't managed to take yet. 3 weeks into her marriage, Clara Whitmore Walker had learned 6 things about Ethan Walker. 1. He woke before anyone else on the ranch, and was usually on horseback before the sun came over the mountain ridge. 2. He ate what was in front of him without complaint, and never asked Martha to make anything special for him. 3. He fixed things himself, and he fixed them well, and he did not fix something once when he could make it stay fixed forever. 4. The hands who worked for him. Pete, who was old, and had been there forever, and Thomas, who Will had confirmed was indeed bitten twice, and the others spoke about him with something that was not quite reverence, but was not far from it. 5. He did not raise his voice. She had never once in 3 weeks heard Ethan Walker raise his voice. This impressed her more than she expected it to. She had grown up in a household where disagreements were conducted at full volume as a matter of principle. The quiet with which Ethan managed his world, not passivity, not suppression, but genuine, deliberate quiet, was something she was still getting used to. 6. He had not touched her. Not in any way that was anything other than what she had agreed to. A coat in a cold wind. A hand steadying her once when the wagon hit a rut. The simple functional contact of 2 people living in proximity. He had not entered her room. He had not implied that he would. He had given her a space in his house, a key of her own, and access to his accounts. And he was losing sleep. She could hear him moving downstairs late when the rest of the house was quiet. Not often, but enough that she noticed. On the 23rd night she came down. She found him at the kitchen table with a letter spread open in front of him and a coffee cup gone cold at his elbow. He looked up when she appeared. He didn't look embarrassed at being caught. He just looked tired. "You don't have to get up," he said. "I was awake anyway," she said. She poured herself coffee. She sat down across from him without asking permission, because 3 weeks in, she had decided that if she was going to live here, she was going to actually live here. "What's the letter?" she asked. Ethan looked down at it. Then he turned it so she could read it. It was from a law office. Whitlock's. A new claim. A property boundary dispute. Paperwork asserting that 30 acres of Ethan's eastern pasture had historically belonged to a parcel now held by one of Whitlock's subsidiary companies. 30 acres. Clara read the letter twice. "This is fabricated," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "The property survey from the original deed would disprove this." "I know, but the original survey is in the county records office, and the county records clerk is Henry Fitch," Clara said. She had encountered the name twice in the accounts, once in connection with a fee that seemed high, once in a note in the margin of a contract, Ethan's handwriting again, Fitch Whitlock man. Ethan looked at her. She looked at him. "I've been reading carefully," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly. More like a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time and is now watching very carefully to see if someone else is actually strong enough to help carry it. "The survey is there," he said. "It just needs someone to get it who won't find it mysteriously misplaced." "Do you have anyone in the county records who isn't Whitlock's?" "One," he said. "Maybe." "Then that's where we start," she said. She pulled the letter across the table toward her, straightened it. "In the morning," she said, "show me everything you have on these boundary claims. Every document, every date, every payment he's ever tried to manufacture." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "You don't have to involve yourself in this," he said. "It's my ranch too," Clara said. Pause. "According to the document we both signed," she added, because she was not going to pretend that piece of paper was more than what it was or less. He held her gaze. "All right," he said. She pushed back her chair, stood up. "Get some sleep," she said. "You look like you've been awake for a week." He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "4 days," he said. She walked back to the stairs. She had one hand on the newel post when she heard him. "Clara." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. She didn't turn around. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "I haven't done anything." She climbed the stairs. She didn't bolt the door that night. She wasn't sure why. She told herself it didn't mean anything. But she lay awake for a long time in the dark, staring at the ceiling of a room that was starting very slowly and very quietly to feel like it might actually belong to her. And in the kitchen below, she heard the sound of papers being organized. The sound of a man who had perhaps, for the first time in a long time, decided not to fight alone. She did not know what was coming. She did not know that Charles Whitlock had already heard about her. She did not know that he had already sent someone to find out exactly who Clara Whitmore was, where she had come from, and what she might be willing to do or afraid of if the right kind of pressure was applied. She did not know that the man everyone in town called dangerous had once tried to stop Whitlock 6 years ago and nearly destroyed everything in the attempt, and that Whitlock had never forgotten it. She did not know any of that yet. But the night she stopped bolting her door was the night everything changed. Because it meant she had started without quite realizing it to trust the most misunderstood man in Montana. And Charles Whitlock was watching. The documents Ethan spread across the kitchen table the next morning told a story that made Clara's stomach tighten. Not because they were confusing, because they were perfectly clear. Every one of Whitlock's claims followed the same pattern: a manufactured debt, a disputed boundary, a payment demanded before a court date could be set. Each one designed not necessarily to win in court, but to cost, to drain, to exhaust a man until he had nothing left to fight with. Clara had seen this kind of pressure before. She had watched it dismantle her father. "How long has this been going on?" she asked without looking up from the papers. "Since my father died," Ethan said. 6 years. 6 years. She set down the page she was holding. "And in 6 years, he hasn't taken the ranch." "No." "Why not? If he has this much reach the county clerk people in town, why hasn't he found a way to finish it?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Because my father was careful," he said. "Before he died, he had the original land grants notarized and registered in 3 separate counties. Whitlock can manufacture claims all he wants, but to actually take the property he needs to invalidate the original deed. And to do that, he needs the original documents," Clara said, "or someone who has the authority to say they don't exist." She looked at him. "And does he have that someone?" "Not yet," Ethan said. "That's what the last 2 years have been about. He's been building toward it, one county record at a time." Clara looked back at the papers. She thought about the letter that had arrived last night. 30 acres of eastern pasture. A boundary dispute that was not really about the boundary at all. "He's not after 30 acres, she said. "No. He's testing to see how you respond, whether you'll fight it in court or pay it off to make it go away." "Yes, and if you fight it in court." "It goes in front of Judge Aldrich," Ethan said, and his voice carried exactly the weight she expected from that name. She found Aldrich in the papers 20 minutes later. A ruling from 3 years ago on a water rights dispute between Ethan and a neighbor. The ruling had gone against Ethan in a way that made no legal sense based on the precedents. In the margin again in Ethan's handwriting was a single word: Whitlock. Clara set the page face down on the table. She had been in this house for 23 days. She had arrived carrying one suitcase and a marriage document and absolutely nothing else. And she was sitting across from a man who had been fighting a rigged system alone for 6 years without breaking. "You need a lawyer," she said. "Not one from this county." "I know." "Do you have someone?" "I have a name. Man in Helena. James Corbin. I've written to him twice." And he wrote back once, said the case was complicated and the retainer would be substantial. "How substantial?" Ethan told her. Clara was quiet for a moment. "The ranch can cover that," she said. "Not right now, not after the last 2 years." She looked at the ledgers she had been working through. She thought about the numbers she had been rearranging in her head since she first opened them. The inefficiencies, the missed opportunities, the places where money was leaking out through nothing but disorganization. "Give me 30 days, she said. Ethan looked at her. "With the accounts," she said. "Give me 30 days to restructure what I can. I think I can find a way to get you to Corbin's retainer without selling anything." A long silence. Ethan's expression was not easy to read, but she was getting better at it, and what she saw was not doubt. It was something more complicated. The look of a man who had learned through years of experience that offers of help usually came with a price he couldn't afford. "I'm not asking for anything back," she said quietly. "Before you think it." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. And the fact that he said it, that he believed it, or was choosing to believe it, felt like something important. Like a door opening rather than closing. 30 days, he said. She pulled the nearest ledger toward her and picked up the pen. She got to work. What nobody in Millhaven understood about Clara Walker, about who she was becoming in the weeks after her arrival, was that grief had made her precise. When everything you love is taken away from you piece by piece, you learn to hold what remains very carefully. You learn to look at numbers without flinching. You learn to find the one solid thing in a shifting situation and stand on it until the ground stops moving. For Clara in those early weeks, the numbers were the solid thing. She worked through the ledgers with the focused intensity of someone who understood that this was not just accounting. It was survival. Ethan's survival, and by extension, hers, not because she needed his protection, but because she had decided somewhere in the gray space between signing that document and not bolting her door that she was not going to watch another good thing be destroyed by a man who thought money and fear were the same as power. She found 7 separate areas where the ranch accounts could be tightened without affecting operations. She found 2 contracts with buyers that were priced below market value, not dramatically, but enough that renegotiating them would add meaningfully to the quarterly income. She found 3 outstanding payments owed to the ranch that had never been properly followed up on. When she showed Ethan the numbers at the end of the first week, he sat with them for a long time without speaking. "Thomas Greer still owes us for the 2 bulls from last spring," she said. "He paid the first installment, and then nothing." "I know," Ethan said. "Have you spoken to him?" "Once." "What did he say?" Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "He said Whitlock had suggested he might want to reconsider his business relationships." Clara set down her pen. "Whitlock told your buyers to stop paying you. He suggested it. He doesn't have to say it directly. Men in this county understand what a suggestion from Charles Whitlock means." She thought about that. She thought about the web of it, the judge, the county clerk, the buyers, the town. The careful, patient construction of a siege that looked from the outside like a man simply having a run of bad luck. "Thomas Greer," she said. "Is he afraid of Whitlock, or does he owe him something?" Ethan considered. "Afraid mostly. His family's been here 2 generations. He doesn't want trouble." "Then he might respond to someone who isn't you," Clara said. Ethan looked at her. "Let me go talk to him," she said. "Clara, I'm not you. He has no reason to be afraid of me. And if Whitlock hasn't gotten to him directly yet, if it was just a suggestion, then a woman coming to discuss a straightforward business debt is not going to alarm him." Ethan was quiet. "You've been fighting this alone," Clara said. "Every move you make, Whitlock watches and prepares for it because he knows you. He's been studying you for 6 years. She leaned forward slightly. "He doesn't know me." The silence stretched. Outside a wind had come up. She could hear it against the side of the house, the particular sound of a Montana winter pushing back. "You'd go alone," Ethan said. "Will can drive me. It's a business call. It's completely ordinary." Another silence. "All right," he said. He said it the way he said most things, without theater, without fuss. But she had learned enough about him by now to know that the simplicity of his agreements was not indifference. It was something rarer. It was genuine trust. She drove out to the Greer place on a Tuesday with Will at the reins and a basket of preserved apples in her lap that Martha had packed without being asked and without explanation. Thomas Greer was a compact man in his 40s with cautious eyes and rough hands. He met her at the door with the particular expression of a man who is trying to decide if he is in trouble before he has any evidence either way. "Mrs. Walker," he said. "Mr. Greer." She smiled. "I'm sorry to come without notice. I've been going through the ranch accounts and I noticed there seems to have been some confusion about the spring payment schedule. I thought it was easier to come in person than to send a letter." She watched him, the tension in his shoulders, the quick look past her to where Will was waiting with the wagon. "I've been meaning to get that settled," he said carefully. "I'm sure," Clara said. "These things get complicated. My husband didn't mention it because I think he's too proud to make a fuss about what might just be a scheduling misunderstanding." She kept her tone light, practical, the tone of a woman discussing nothing more threatening than bookkeeping. Greer looked at her. "People been talking," he said. "About Walker." "People are always talking about someone," Clara said. "In my experience, what people say about a man and what a man actually is are usually quite different things." "Whitlock." He stopped himself, but it was enough. Clara kept her face absolutely neutral. She had known it would come up. She had prepared for it. "Mr. Whitlock's business opinions are his own," she said pleasantly. "But my husband and yours have had a fair business arrangement for 3 years, and I'd hate to see a payment dispute create problems between two neighbors who have no real quarrel with each other." She paused. "My husband is a patient man," she said. "But patience has limits, and if this goes to a formal dispute, it gets complicated for everyone." Another pause. "I'd much rather settle it today if we can." Thomas Greer looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Give me a minute," and went back inside. Will from the wagon shot Clara a look of undisguised admiration. She kept her expression perfectly composed until Greer came back with a bank draft, the full amount. She thanked him. She gave him the basket of apples. She wished his family well. She was back in the wagon and a quarter-mile down the road before she exhaled. That, Will said with great conviction, was something. "It was a business conversation," Clara said. "Sure," Will said. "Sure it was." She allowed herself a small smile. One. But it was a real one. She was 2 weeks into her 30 days when the first warning arrived. It was not a legal document this time. It was a note. Left at the gate of the ranch, folded once, no envelope. Her name written on the outside, in a hand she didn't recognize. She opened it at the kitchen table while Ethan was out. It said, "You should know what kind of man you married. Ask him about Margaret Ellison. Then ask yourself if you want to stay." She read it 3 times. Then she set it flat on the table and looked at it. Margaret Ellison. She had never heard that name. She thought about going to Martha first. Then she thought about that impulse, the impulse to ask someone else before asking Ethan directly, and she decided it was the wrong instinct. If she was going to be in this marriage, in this fight, then she needed to be someone who went to the source. She waited until evening. When Ethan came in from the workday and washed up and sat down to supper, Clara waited until Martha had cleared the plates and left the room. Then she put the note on the table. Ethan looked at it. He didn't pick it up. He already knew what it was, or something like it. She could see it, not guilt, but recognition. The particular resignation of a man who has been waiting for a shoe to drop. "Margaret Ellison," Clara said. He looked up at her. "Tell me," she said. Not an accusation, not a demand. Just 2 words said with the steadiness she had been practicing for 2 weeks. He told her. Margaret Ellison had been the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a man named James Ellison, who had worked a smaller property to the north of Walker Land. 5 years ago, Whitlock had started the same campaign of manufactured debt against Ellison that he had been running against Ethan. Ellison, unlike Ethan, had not had the resources to resist. Ethan had tried to help him. He had tried to lend money, to share legal resources, to stand beside Ellison in the county dispute, and Whitlock had used that against him. He had spread a story carefully strategically through exactly the right people that Ethan had been in a personal relationship with Margaret Ellison, that he had taken advantage of her, that he had made promises to her family that he had not kept. None of it was true, but the Ellisons, destroyed by the financial pressure and humiliated by the stories about their daughter, had eventually believed it. James Ellison had died 2 years ago, bankrupt, broken, and convinced that Ethan Walker had wronged his family. Margaret Ellison had moved away. Ethan had not been able to clear his name with them before she left. He said all of this without elaboration, without self-pity, in the same even-weighted voice he used for everything, but with something underneath it now, something that Clara had not heard from him before. Guilt. Not the guilt of a man who had done something wrong. The guilt of a man who had tried to do right and watched it turn into damage anyway. "You blame yourself," she said. "I should have been more careful," he said. "I knew Whitlock watched everything I did. I knew he would use any connection against me, and I still thought I could help Ellison without it becoming a weapon." He was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong." Clara was quiet too. She was thinking about the note. Who had sent it? What they had hoped it would do to her. "Whitlock sent that note," she said. "Or someone working for him," Ethan said. "Yes. He's trying to separate us." A pause. "Yes," Ethan said. "Because I'm a problem he didn't account for." Ethan looked at her then. Really looked at her the way he sometimes did when she said something that landed close to a truth he had been circling. "You went to Thomas Greer," he said. "He paid the debt." "I know. Thomas Greer has never paid anything on time in his life. He paid that draft within 24 hours of your visit." Ethan's voice was steady, but there was something else in it now, something careful. "Whitlock heard about it." Clara felt a cold thread of clarity move through her. "How do you know?" "Because yesterday, for the first time in 4 months, I got a message from him directly. Not through a lawyer. Directly." She waited. "He wants a meeting," Ethan said. "About what?" He didn't say specifically, but he used the word settlement. Clara thought about that word. She thought about what she knew of Charles Whitlock from 6 weeks of reading between the lines of every document in that office. A man who sent notes to frighten young women. A man who told stories about daughters of dying farmers to neutralize men who tried to help them. A man who had spent 6 years systematically dismantling the life of someone who had simply refused to give him what he wanted. A settlement from a man like that was not an offer. It was a test to see how much you still believed you had to lose. "You're not going alone," she said. Ethan looked at her. "To the meeting," she said. "You're not going alone." The silence was different this time. Not the silence of a man considering whether to accept. The silence of a man who had forgotten somewhere in 6 years of carrying things alone that not being alone was a possibility. "It could put you in a difficult position," he said finally. "I'm already in a difficult position," Clara said. "I signed a document. I moved to Montana. I've been doing your accounting for 2 weeks, and Charles Whitlock has already sent someone to my gate with a note designed to make me doubt you." She looked at him steadily. "I'm past difficult. Let's go to the meeting." The meeting was set for Friday at the county seat. In the days between, something changed on the ranch. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would have been visible to an outsider. But Clara felt it a shift in the texture of the days. The way Ethan stopped ending conversations when she came into a room. The way the ranch hands who had initially treated her with the polite wariness they might give any newcomer began speaking to her directly, asking her things, including her. Old Pete, who had been on Walker Land for longer than Ethan had been alive, stopped her one morning beside the barn. He was a man of extraordinary economy of expression. Clara had heard him say more than 4 consecutive sentences only twice in 6 weeks, and when he stopped, she waited. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're tougher than you look," he said. Coming from Pete, this was apparently the equivalent of a long speech. "Thank you," Clara said. He nodded once and walked away. That night, working late at the kitchen table while Ethan reviewed papers across from her, she found herself in a moment so quiet and ordinary that it caught her entirely off guard. Just 2 people, a table between them, lamps burning. The house settled around them in the cold. She had lived this scene before in her father's house, long before the debts, before the creditors, before everything cracked apart. The particular piece of working beside someone in silence that is comfortable rather than empty. She had not expected to find that here. She had not expected to find anything here except survival. "You're not what I expected," she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out directly without preparation, the way honest things sometimes do, when you've spent enough time in someone's presence that the careful distance starts to dissolve. Ethan looked up. "What did you expect?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Someone who needed something from me," she said, "in a way that I'd regret." He was quiet for a moment. "And instead," he said. She looked at him across the lamp-lit table at the tired lines around his eyes, at the way he held a pen like a man more accustomed to tools, at the 6 years of quietly fought battles that had left their marks on him without breaking him. "Instead," she said carefully, "I found someone who needed help, which is completely different." Ethan held her gaze. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't say thank you again. I told you not to." Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, but close. "I was going to say," he said, "that you don't have to come Friday. I mean it, if it becomes complicated." "I'm coming Friday," she said. "All right," he said. She looked back down at the ledger. "I found 3 more accounting errors," she said. "2 of them are in your favor. One of them is going to require a conversation with the grain supplier." "Which one?" "Henderson Brothers. They've been overcharging on the winter feed contracts for at least 2 years. Not dramatically. Just enough that you wouldn't notice unless you compared the invoices against market prices." Ethan set down his pen. "Henderson Brothers." "Robert Henderson is on the County Commerce Board," Clara said. "Which puts him in Whitlock's circle," Ethan said. "I imagine so." He picked his pen back up. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked. And the way he asked it, not "what should we do," not "what would you suggest," but "what do you want to do," made something in Clara's chest catch. "I want to document every overcharge," she said. "With market comparisons, before Friday." "Why before Friday?" "Because if Whitlock's meeting is about settlement," she said, "I want to walk into that room knowing exactly how many of his people have had their hands in our accounts. And I want him to know that I know." Ethan looked at her steadily. "You understand what that does," he said. "If you show your hand like that—" "He already knows I'm a problem," Clara said. "That note at the gate told us that. We're not going to surprise him by playing quiet." She set her pen down. "So we don't play quiet. We walk in with everything we have, and we make him understand that this fight just got more complicated than he planned for." The fire in the kitchen stove crackled. The wind outside had dropped to almost nothing. Ethan Walker, who had been fighting Charles Whitlock alone for 6 years, looked across the table at the woman he had married out of a desperate arrangement, and an instinct he hadn't been able to name, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then, "You know this means he'll go after you personally." "He already did," Clara said. "The note." "That was the beginning. If he decides you're a real threat, then he decides," she said. "I've already had everything taken away from me once by a man who thought he had the right to decide what I was worth and what I could handle. I survived that." She looked at Ethan. "I'm not going to shrink back because someone wants me to." The silence after that was different from all the other silences. Because in it, Ethan Walker did something she had not seen him do in 6 weeks. He set down everything in his hands. He looked at her with no calculation, no guardedness, no careful management of how much he let her see. He just looked at her. And she saw it finally clearly without question, the thing underneath all the flatness and the quiet, and the years of holding the walls high. He was afraid. Not of Whitlock, not of the meeting, not of losing the ranch. He was afraid of losing this, whatever this was. Whatever had been building between them in 6 weeks of ledgers and late nights and a gray mare and a gate left unbolted. He was afraid of it because he had not expected it, and he did not entirely know what to do with something he had not expected. She understood that. She was not entirely sure what to do with it either. But she had made one decision sometime between the note at the gate and this moment sitting across a lamplit table from the most misunderstood man in Montana. She was not walking away, not from the fight, not from him. "Get some sleep," she said quietly. "Friday is 3 days away." She gathered the papers she was working on. She stood up. She walked to the stairs. She did not look back. But she heard him. After a moment, the sound of his chair, the movement of papers being set in order, the lamp being turned down. The sound of a man who for the first time in 6 years was ending his night before midnight. She climbed the stairs. She did not bolt the door. And downstairs in the quiet dark of a kitchen that had slowly stopped feeling like a stranger's house. Ethan Walker sat for one more minute in the silence. Then he went to bed. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he slept. Friday arrived the way difficult days always do, quietly without announcement, giving you no time to prepare beyond what you had already done. Clara was dressed before sunrise. She had chosen her clothes deliberately the night before. Her best dress, the one she had kept through everything. The one her mother had helped her make 4 years ago from fabric that had cost more than they should have spent. She had pressed it herself. Borrowed Martha's iron, worked out the travel creases until the fabric lay clean and straight. It was not vanity, it was armor. She came downstairs to find Ethan already at the table, dressed in the cleanest clothes she had seen on him. Dark coat, clean shirt hat, set on the chair beside him. He had shaved. His hands were wrapped around a coffee cup. He looked up when she came in. He said nothing, but his eyes moved across her once briefly with an expression she had no category for yet. Martha set a plate in front of each of them without commentary. But as Clara sat down, the older woman put one hand briefly on her shoulder and squeezed it once. That was all. It was enough. They ate in silence. Will had been told to stay at the ranch. Ethan's instruction, quiet and firm, delivered the night before, without explanation. The boy had objected with his whole face, but he had obeyed. Old Pete hitched the wagon. When Ethan climbed up to the bench, he extended his hand to help Clara up. She took it. His grip was steady. Of course it was. She settled her skirts. He took the reins. They moved out onto the road toward Millhaven, and neither of them spoke for the first mile, and somehow that silence was not empty at all. "He'll try to separate us in the room," Clara said. "I know. He'll speak to you as if I'm not there. Or he'll speak to me as if you're not capable of speaking for yourself. Probably. Whatever he says about the land, about the past, about anything, don't answer until I've had a chance to look at him. I want to see how he handles being looked at." Ethan glanced at her sideways. "You've done something like this before," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "My father had a creditor," she said. "A man named Briggs. He used the same methods, different scale." She was quiet for a moment. "I was 17. I sat in that meeting and watched my father get taken apart piece by piece, and I didn't know what to do about it." She paused. "I'm not 17 anymore." Ethan turned back to the road. "No," he said quietly. "You're not." Charles Whitlock was not what Clara had built in her mind. She had been expecting something theatrical. A large man. Someone who dressed his power visibly and wore it like a statement. He was medium height. Well-dressed, but not extravagant. Hair going silver at the temples. Eyes that were pale and intelligent and settled on Clara the moment she walked through the door with the precise measuring attention of a man who had already gathered whatever information he needed about her and was now simply confirming it. He had brought a lawyer. A man named Gerard who had the practiced blankness of someone paid to be agreeable and leave the unpleasant parts to his employer. The meeting room was in the county solicitor's office. 4 chairs around a table. a window behind Whitlock that put him in better light and everyone else in shadow. Clara noticed this the moment she sat down. She adjusted her chair slightly to the left out of the shadow. Whitlock noticed her do it. His expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes. He had not expected her to notice. "Good. Mr. Walker," Whitlock said. He did not acknowledge Clara. "I appreciate you coming." "Mr. Whitlock," Ethan said. He sat with his hands flat on the table, still, waiting. A beat of silence fell. Whitlock let it stretch, which was a technique Clara recognized, making the other person feel the need to fill empty space. Ethan did not fill it. Clara did not fill it. Whitlock moved on. "I think we've both spent enough time and money on the existing disputes," he said. His tone was reasonable, almost warm, the tone of a man proposing something sensible. The boundary claim, the water access issue from last spring, the outstanding debt question. None of these need to go to court. I think there's a figure that settles everything cleanly. He named a number. It was a fraction of the actual value of the disputed interests. Clara watched Ethan. He was looking at Whitlock with the same expression he used when he was assessing a situation, not reactive, just receiving information. "That's an interesting number," Ethan said. "It accounts for legal costs on both sides," Gerard offered. "What it accounts for," Clara said pleasantly, "is approximately 40 cents on the dollar of what the disputed interests are actually worth." The room was quiet. Whitlock looked at her. "Mrs. Walker," he said. He smiled. It was a perfectly constructed smile. "I understand you've been helping your husband with the ranch accounts. That's admirable." "Thank you," Clara said. "I've also been helping him understand the full history of his business relationships." She set a folded paper on the table, including Henderson Brothers supply contracts. A silence. Not the comfortable kind. "Henderson Brothers is a reputable business," Gerard said. "I'm sure they are," Clara said. "That's why I imagine they'll want to discuss why they've been invoicing Walker Ranch at 18% above market rate for winter feed for the past 2 years. She kept her voice completely level. "That kind of discrepancy tends to raise questions. About judgment at minimum. About intent at maximum." Whitlock had not moved, but something in his stillness had changed. The stillness of a man listening had shifted into the stillness of a man recalculating. Clara recognized this too. "My husband," she said, "has been patient for 6 years. He's been patient with manufactured debts, with boundary claims that don't hold up to a reading of the original land grants, and with the particular kind of pressure that works by making a man feel alone." She paused. "He is not alone." She looked at Whitlock directly. "We have documentation of every claim going back to the original dispute. We have a name in Helena James Corbin who has agreed to take the case." This was not yet fully true, but it was going to be true by the end of next week, and she had learned from watching her father that you sometimes had to speak from where you were going, not just from where you were standing. "And we have, among other things, a very interesting set of records about the Ellison property sale 2 years ago that I imagine a Helena court would find worth examining." Charles Whitlock looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she had not expected. He smiled. Not the constructed smile. Something different. Something that acknowledged without quite admitting that he had underestimated her. "Your wife," he said to Ethan, "is quite something." "I know," Ethan said. "This doesn't have to be a war," Whitlock said. He addressed Ethan now, leaving Clara out of it, deliberately. The shift was almost imperceptible, but she caught it. "I've always believed in practical solutions. The boundary dispute can be dropped. The debt question can be renegotiated on better terms. All I'm asking for is a reasonable conversation about the eastern parcel." "The eastern parcel isn't for sale," Ethan said. "Everything has a price." "No," Ethan said. "It doesn't." Another silence. Whitlock sat back in his chair. He looked at both of them, unhurried, patient, the expression of a man who has been doing this long enough to know that most things resolve themselves eventually. "I'll be in Millhaven for 2 more weeks," he said. "If you change your mind about a conversation, you know where to reach me." He stood. Gerard was already gathering papers. Whitlock paused at the door. He turned back and looked at Clara. Just at Clara this time, not at Ethan. "Be careful, Mrs. Walker," he said. "Men in Ethan Walker's position have a way of pulling good people into bad situations." He held her gaze for one deliberate second. "I'd hate to see that happen to you." The door closed behind them. Clara sat very still for a moment. Then she exhaled. Ethan was looking at her. "You mentioned Corbin," he said. "He hasn't confirmed." "He will," Clara said. "I wrote to him yesterday with the full documentation. The case is stronger than what you sent him before. He'll confirm." A beat of silence. "The Ellison records," Ethan said carefully. "What do you actually have?" "Enough to ask questions," Clara said. "Which is different from having proof. But Whitlock doesn't know exactly what we have. And a man who depends on other people not knowing things is always more afraid of uncertainty than of specific evidence." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "He's going to come back harder," he said. "I know." That warning at the end was not a warning, Clara said. "It was a test. He wanted to see if I would look at you when he said it." "Did you?" "No," she said. "I looked at him." Ethan was quiet. "Good," he said finally. They were halfway home when the rain started. Montana winter rain, horizontal, relentless, the kind that finds every gap in your coat and settles in. Ethan handled the horses without comment. Clara sat beside him with her best dress getting wet and her hands folded in her lap, and her mind already 2 steps ahead, running through what came next. Corbin. The documents. The Ellison property records that she had mentioned as a bluff but needed to become real as quickly as possible. "The Ellison sale," she said, raising her voice slightly against the rain. "Who handled it?" "After James Ellison died. His brother came from Ohio to settle the estate," Ethan said. "Sold the property inside of 3 weeks. To Whitlock's holding company." "Yes." "For how much?" he told her. Clara did the math in her head. The number was low, significantly low for the size and quality of the land. "The brother was rushed," she said. "He didn't know the local market." "I was also given an appraisal by the bank," Ethan said. "The bank that has Charles Whitlock on its board of directors." She turned and looked at him. "You know all of this," she said. "Yes." "And you've never done anything with it?" "I didn't have enough," he said. "Knowing something and proving it are different problems." "What would you need?" "The original appraisal documents. The bank's internal valuation. If those are different..." "The bank is legally required to retain records for 7 years, Clara said. "The sale was 2 years ago." Ethan was quiet. "You can't just walk into a bank and ask for its internal valuation records," he said. "No," she said. "But a lawyer with proper standing can subpoena them." More silence. "Corbin," he said. "Corbin," she said. The rain came down harder. The horses kept moving. And Clara Whitmore Walker, soaking wet in her best dress on a Montana road, felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not hope exactly. Hope was too fragile for what this was. This was momentum. The particular precious, dangerous feeling of a fight beginning to turn. The letter from James Corbin arrived 8 days later. Clara was in the office when Ethan brought it in. He set it on the desk in front of her without opening it, which told her everything about how he had been trained by 6 years of disappointment. She opened it. She read it twice. Then she looked up. "He's taking the case," she said. Ethan stood very still. "All of it," he said. "All of it. The boundary disputes, the debt claims, and..." She looked back at the letter. "He says he has his own interest in the Ellison property situation. He's encountered Whitlock's holding companies before in other matters. He says, and I quote, that the pattern is familiar enough to be worth examining carefully." She set the letter down. She looked at Ethan. How was doing what she had learned to recognize as his version of an emotional response, that particular stillness, that was not absence, but fullness, like a man who feels something large and has nowhere obvious to put it. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She pushed the letter across to him. He read it. She watched him read it, the way his jaw shifted slightly, the way his hands were too still on the paper. 6 years of fighting alone. 6 years of manufactured defeats and whisper campaigns and isolation. And a letter that said for the first time, "You are not wrong, and you are not fighting this alone." He set the letter down on the desk. He did not say anything for a moment. "I need to tell you something," he said. She waited. "When I agreed to this arrangement," he said the word for their marriage, always careful, never romantic, because he was a man who meant what he said, and he had never promised her romance. "I told myself it was practical, that you needed somewhere to go, and I needed something I couldn't name clearly." He looked at her. "I didn't expect this," he said. She held his gaze. "I didn't expect you to go to Thomas Greer. I didn't expect you to find the Henderson invoices. I didn't expect you to walk into a room with Whitlock and talk about a lawyer we didn't have yet, like you were already certain." He stopped. "I didn't expect to feel like someone was standing beside me." The room was very quiet. Clara looked at this man, this worn, careful, unfairly maligned man, who had put a coat around her shoulders in a freezing wind before he even knew her name, and she felt something shift inside her. Not dramatically, not like something cracking open, more like something settling into place. "You don't have to say anything about it," he said, reading her silence. "I'm not asking for Ethan," she said quietly. "Stop." He stopped. "I'm not going to tell you what I feel right now," she said, "because I think if I try to name it I'll get it wrong, and I'd rather be honest than fast." He nodded once, just once. "But I'm not going anywhere," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the Corbin letter, folded it carefully, put it in his inside coat pocket. "I'm going to ride out and check the eastern fence line," he said. "All right," she said. He stood, picked up his hat. At the door he paused. "Clara." "Yes." "Thank you," he said. And before she could remind him not to, he said, "I know you told me not to say it. I'm saying it anyway." He left. She sat at the desk alone. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she did not feel like a woman who had lost everything. She felt like a woman who was building something. It was Will who came running 2 hours later. Clara heard him before she saw him boots on the porch stairs too fast. The specific sound of urgency that makes your stomach drop before your brain has processed anything. He burst into the kitchen where she was working with Martha. "Someone at the east gate," he said, breathing hard. "Man, I don't know. He left this." He held out an envelope. Clara took it. She looked at the front. It was addressed to her. Not to Ethan. To her by name. She opened it at the kitchen table with Martha and Will both watching. Inside were 3 pages. The first page was a letter. Whitlock's letterhead. It said in the careful language of a man who had lawyers review everything before it was sent, that he had become aware of certain communications between Clara Whitmore Walker and associates of the late James Ellison, and that he was in possession of documents that he believed she would find of significant personal interest. The second page was a copy of a document she had never seen. It was a letter, written on her father's stationery, her father's signature at the bottom, and it was addressed to Charles Whitlock. It was dated 14 months ago, months before Clara had come to Montana, before she had known anything about Whitlock. It was a letter in which her father, the man whose bankruptcy had driven her to this marriage, had asked Whitlock for a personal loan, had described in detail the extent of the family's financial difficulties, had mentioned by name his daughter Clara, and at the bottom under her father's signature was a handwritten note in a different hand. Whitlock's hand, she assumed. The note said, "Agreed. Standard arrangement. The girl will do." Clara read it 3 times. Her hands were completely steady. Her breathing was completely steady. Everything else inside her was not. Martha had read over her shoulder. She heard the older woman exhale sharply. "What does it mean?" Will asked. He could tell it was something serious, but he was 14 and could not read the full weight of it. "It means," Clara said carefully, "that my father didn't lose everything accidentally." She set the pages down. She looked at the 3rd page. It was a brief note in Whitlock's handwriting. No letterhead this time, just a few sentences. You came here believing you had no choice. You should know the truth. The arrangement was made before you were told anything. Your father agreed to terms. The debt to Walker that brought you here was structured to ensure you would have no other option. You were not rescued by this marriage. You were delivered to it. I think you deserve to know that before you continue making decisions on behalf of a man who may not have told you the full truth of how this arrangement came to be. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Martha's hand came down on Clara's shoulder. Clara did not move. She was thinking very clearly. More clearly, in fact, than she had felt in weeks. There was something about shock when it was large enough that burned away everything except the essential. The essential was this: Whitlock wanted her to believe she had been deceived. Wanted her to feel that the ground under her feet, the ranch the marriage Ethan was built on, a lie. He wanted her shaken. He wanted her to go to Ethan with this document and watch what happened between them. He wanted to use it to split something that had proven harder to split than he had anticipated. "Where is Ethan?" she asked. Her voice was perfectly level. "Still on the east fence," Will said. "Should I?" "Yes," she said. "Go get him." Will ran. Martha had not taken her hand off Clara's shoulder. "What are you thinking?" the older woman asked. "I'm thinking," Clara said slowly, "that a man who needed to send this letter is a man who is frightened." She picked up the pages, folded them, put them in the front of the ledger she had been working in. "He sat in that meeting room," she said, "and he watched me, and he decided I was the threat. Not Ethan. Me." She looked at Martha. "He's right." Martha looked at her steadily. "He's also right that I didn't know about my father's letter," Clara said. "And Ethan," Martha said carefully. "I don't know yet what Ethan knew," Clara said. "I'm going to ask him directly." Martha nodded slowly. "And if," the older woman started. "One thing at a time," Clara said. 15 minutes later, she heard the horse. Ethan came in from the cold with mud on his boots, and the particular look of a man who has been told something urgent by a 14-year-old and is trying to assess the situation before he walks through the door. He looked at Clara's face. His expression shifted immediately. "What happened?" he said. She set the pages on the kitchen table. He came to the table, looked at the documents without touching them. She watched him read. She watched his face. This was the most important thing she had ever watched in her life. She understood that completely, and she watched it with everything she had. He read the first page. His expression did not change significantly, which told her he had known about Whitlock's letter, or at least suspected something like it. He read the second page, the letter from her father. His jaw tightened. Once. He read the third page, Whitlock's note. He set the pages down. He looked at her. "I need you to tell me what you know," she said. "All of it." He pulled out a chair. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the table. "I knew your father had contacted Whitlock," he said. "I didn't know the details. A man in Helena who watches Whitlock's business dealings told me your family's name had come up in connection with one of his companies. I didn't know what the arrangement was." "But you knew there was an arrangement." "I suspected there was more to how the introduction came about than the lawyer presented it to me." He held her gaze. "I should have told you that." "Yes," she said. "You should have." "I was afraid." He stopped. "Of what?" she said. "That if I told you I had doubts about how the arrangement was made, you'd feel more trapped than you already did," he said. "And I didn't want you to feel trapped." The silence between them was very still. "Ethan," she said. He waited. "I don't feel trapped," she said. "I felt trapped when I arrived. I felt trapped when I read that note at the gate." She looked at him steadily. "Right now I feel angry, which is different." Something moved in his face. "There's a difference between not telling me something to spare my feelings," she said, "and not telling me something because you were managing me. Do you understand the difference?" "Yes," he said. "Which one was it?" He held her eyes. "The first one," he said. "God help me, it was the first one. I was trying to protect you, which I understand is..." "The wrong choice," she said. I need information. I need the truth. I cannot help either of us if I'm working with half the picture." "I know," he said. "So from now on," she said, "everything, even the things you think will hurt." "Everything," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the note, about her father's letter, about a man who had looked at a girl in financial ruin and decided she was useful and structured a situation to deliver her like a parcel. She thought about the man sitting across from her who had put a coat on her shoulders in the cold, who had given her a key and a bolt and a ledger and the first genuine freedom she had felt in years. She thought about who had actually treated her like a person. "He sent this to destroy us," she said. "He thinks if I believe you knew about my father's arrangement, I'll stop trusting you." "Will you?" Ethan asked. She picked up the pages. She folded them again. She put them back in the ledger. "No," she said. His exhale was barely audible. "But I want my father's letter," she said. "The original. Whatever Whitlock has. I want it." "Corbin can subpoena it," Ethan said. "If we can establish it's relevant to the broader fraud." "It's relevant," she said. "My father didn't lose everything randomly. Whitlock was involved in that too. I'd stake everything on it." She stood up. Her mind was already moving, already building the next step and the step after that, already placing what she knew against what she needed to know and calculating the distance between them. This was the thing Whitlock had not understood when he sent that letter. He had sent it to break her. He had not accounted for what happened to a woman who had already been broken once and had put herself back together with her own hands. She did not break again easily. She stood at the kitchen table of a Montana ranch house in the dead of winter, and she made a decision so quiet it barely made a sound. Charles Whitlock had spent 6 years trying to take everything from Ethan Walker. He had just made it personal, and Clara Whitmore Walker, who had arrived at this ranch with one suitcase, and nothing else was going to make him regret that. James Corbin arrived in Millhaven on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after his letter. Clara had not known what to expect. Ethan had described him as capable. Corbin's own letter had been precise and confident. But lawyers who were capable and confident on paper sometimes arrived in person as something considerably smaller. Corbin was not smaller in person. He was a compact man in his early 50s, with sharp dark eyes and the particular kind of unhurried energy that belongs to people who have learned that rushing usually costs more time than it saves. He wore a good coat, carried a leather case that was clearly heavy, and shook Clara's hand before he shook Ethan's, which she noticed, and which told her something about his judgment. He sat down at the kitchen table. Martha produced coffee without being asked, as she always did, and he opened his case and set out 3 organized folders before he said a single word about the case. "I've been watching Whitlock's holding companies for 4 years, he said. "Different clients, different counties, same pattern." He looked at Ethan. "You lasted longer than most." "I wasn't going to leave," Ethan said. "I know. That's why I'm here." Corbin looked at Clara. "Your letter outlined the Henderson invoices and the Ellison property sale. I need everything you have on both. Original documents, dates, your margin notes, everything." "I have it organized," Clara said, "by date and by claim type." Corbin looked at her for a moment. "Your letter was also considerably more precise than most correspondence I receive from non-lawyers," he said. "I managed accounts for 8 years, Clara said. "Numbers don't lie. They just get hidden." Something shifted in Corbin's expression. Respect, she thought. The particular variety that arrives without fanfare from someone who doesn't give it easily. "All right," he said. "Show me what you have." She showed him. For 2 hours, they worked through everything. The Henderson invoices compared against market rates. The Ellison property appraisal against comparable land sales in the same county that same year. The Whitlock Holding Company's pattern of acquisition, always after a period of manufactured financial pressure, always at below market prices, always with the same combination of sympathetic bank valuations and convenient county record complications. Corbin did not interrupt often, but when he did, his questions were surgical. He went directly to the weakest points. The places where Clara's documentation had gaps, where an argument could be challenged, and he stayed there until they had either found stronger support or acknowledged the limitation honestly. "The father's letter," he said eventually. Clara had placed it last deliberately. She slid it across to him. He read it. He read Whitlock's handwritten note at the bottom of the third page. His expression did not change. "This was delivered to you directly," he said. "At our gate. By a man none of us recognized." "Whitlock's mistake," Corbin said. Clara looked at him. "How so?" "He sent this to frighten you, to create doubt between you and your husband." Corbin tapped the page. "But in doing so, he confirmed his own involvement in the initial arrangement. He's admitted in his own handwriting that he structured the conditions that brought you here." He looked up. "A court would call that evidence of intent." The kitchen was very quiet. "He didn't think I'd use it against him," Clara said. "He thought you'd be too frightened, or too humiliated, or too focused on your marriage to recognize what he'd handed you," Corbin said. "Men like Whitlock make that mistake with women regularly." A pause. "It's one of the reasons they're often undone by them." Ethan, who had been sitting quietly through most of the session, said, "What does this change?" "It expands the case significantly," Corbin said. "We're no longer just defending against boundary disputes and manufactured debts. We're building a pattern of fraud across multiple parties, multiple counties, and a span of years." He closed the folder. "That's a different kind of case. It takes longer, it costs more, and it will make Whitlock considerably more aggressive before it makes him less aggressive." Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Corbin. "How much more aggressive?" she said. "He'll go after your reputation first," Corbin said. "Both of yours. He'll look for anything personal, anything embarrassing, anything that plays on the story the town already half believes about your husband. He'll try to put you in a position where continuing the fight costs more than settling." "We're not settling," Clara said. Corbin looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ethan. "No," Ethan said. "We're not." Corbin nodded once. He picked up his coffee cup. He drank. "Then we build the case," he said. "And we don't make any moves until I tell you we're ready to make them." The aggression came faster than even Corbin had predicted. It started small. A story circulating in town. Clara heard about it from Will, who heard it from a boy at the feed store, which was how most stories in Millhaven moved. The story was that Clara had come to Walker Ranch under false pretenses, that she was not who she claimed to be, that her family's financial troubles were the result not of bad luck or of Whitlock's manipulation, but of her father's dishonesty in business dealings. Clara heard this on a Thursday. By Friday, there was a second story. This one was uglier. It said that Clara had been seen in private correspondence with Charles Whitlock before her marriage. That the whole arrangement, her working on the accounts, her attending the meeting was part of a plan she had been involved in from the beginning. That she was Whitlock's inside person. Will brought her this one in person, practically vibrating with indignation on her behalf. "It's not true," he said. "Everyone who knows you knows it's not true." "Thank you, Will," she said. "I told Tommy Briggs it was a lie and he should shut his mouth." "What did Tommy Briggs say?" "He said his father heard it from someone reliable." Will's jaw was set with the magnificent moral certainty of a 14-year-old who has not yet learned that moral certainty doesn't always win. "His father's an idiot." "Don't say that about people's fathers," Clara said automatically, "even when it's true." She looked at him. "Especially then," she said. "It doesn't help." She found Ethan in the barn. She told him what she'd heard. She watched his face go through something complicated. Anger, yes, but underneath it, something older and more tired. The look of a man who has had his name dragged through stories for so long that the dragging has left a particular kind of scar. "This is the pattern," he said. "He did this with the Ellisons. He did it with 2 other families before that. Create doubt fast enough and loud enough, and people don't have time to think clearly about whether it makes sense." "It won't work," Clara said. "It worked before you were fighting it alone." She looked at him steadily. "And before nobody in this town had actually spent time with you. They were judging a rumor." She paused. "The hands know us. Martha knows us. Will knows us. Pete has been here since your father's time. That's not nothing. Ethan looked at her. Corbin said don't make any moves until he's ready, he said. Corbin said don't make any legal moves, Clara said. He said nothing about talking to our neighbors. She went to see Eleanor Marsh first. Eleanor was Will's aunt, the woman who had raised him after his parents died, and she had a reputation in the county for two things: being impossible to fool and saying exactly what she thought, regardless of who was in the room. Clara brought nothing with her except herself. No documents, no prepared speech, no strategy beyond honesty. She sat at Eleanor Marsh's kitchen table, and she told her the truth. All of it. Her father's letter. The meeting with Whitlock. The stories now going around town. She laid it out with the same clarity she brought to the ledgers. No embellishment, no performance, just facts in order. Eleanor Marsh listened without interrupting, which Clara had been told was unusual. When Clara finished, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You know, the older woman said, I've lived in this county 31 years. I watched what happened to the Ellisons. I watched what happened to the Harmon family before that. She looked at Clara. I always knew something wasn't right. But knowing something isn't right and knowing what to do about it are two separate problems. Yes, Clara said. What do you need from me? Clara held her gaze. I need people who know the truth to be willing to say so, she said. Not in a courtroom, not yet, just in their daily lives, when the stories come around, when someone repeats what they've heard. She paused. Whitlock's power in this county depends on people being afraid to contradict him. If enough people simply stop being afraid at the same time. The story changes, Eleanor said. Yes. Eleanor Marsh looked at her for a long moment. My brother worked for Walker Ranch 3 years ago, she said. Before he got sick, Ethan Walker paid his medical bills and told him to take as long as he needed to recover. Never said a word about it publicly. She paused. My brother told me. I never told anyone else because I thought, what does it matter who would believe it? Clara felt something move in her chest. It matters, she said quietly. Eleanor stood up. I'll talk to some people, she said. Don't thank me. I should have done it a long time ago. The second person Clara went to see was Thomas Greer. He was warier this time. The stories had reached him too, and she could see the calculation in his eyes. The same calculation that men in small counties with Whitlock connections on 3 sides are always making. What does it cost to stand up versus what does it cost to stay quiet? I know you've heard the new story, Clara said. She didn't sit down. She stood in his doorway and looked at him directly. I know it's putting you in a difficult position. He didn't deny it. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that puts your family at risk, she said. I want to be clear about that. What's happening on Walker Ranch is our fight. We're not asking anyone else to carry it. He looked at her. But I am going to ask you one question, she said. In 3 years of doing business with Ethan Walker, has he ever cheated you? Has he ever misrepresented something? Has he ever done anything that made you think he was dishonest? Thomas Greer was quiet. No, he said. That's all I needed to know, Clara said. What you do with that is your decision. She left. She did not know what he would decide, but she had planted the question. And sometimes a question left in the right mind does its own work. She was walking back from the Greer place when she saw the rider. A man she didn't recognize moving fast on the road toward town. He passed close enough that she could see he was carrying something, a satchel, papers perhaps, and that he wasn't from around here. The way he rode said city. The horse said expensive. She thought nothing of it for about 30 seconds. Then she thought about timing. She had been out visiting people all morning. The ranch was relatively quiet. Ethan was supposed to be meeting with Corbin at the office to review the subpoena process for the bank records. She started walking faster. She came back to the ranch to find Martha standing on the porch with her arms folded and an expression that Clara had learned to read as controlled alarm. What happened? Clara said immediately. Man came while you were out, Martha said. Left a document with old Pete, legal looking. Pete couldn't read it well enough to know what it said. Where is it? Inside on the kitchen table. She read it in under a minute. It was a summons. Whitlock had filed a civil complaint. Against Ethan personally. Not against the ranch, against Ethan Walker as an individual. The complaint alleged defamation. It alleged that statements made by Ethan Walker and by parties acting in concert with him had damaged Whitlock's business reputation in the county. Parties acting in concert with him. Her. She read that phrase twice. Then she put the document in the ledger with everything else. She was still standing at the kitchen table when she heard the wagon. Ethan and Corbin came in together. She could tell from Ethan's face that he already knew someone had reached him before he got home. Corbin, however, looked considerably less alarmed than she had expected. "You've seen it," Corbin said, looking at her. "Yes. He filed this morning. I heard about it in town." He sat down. "This is actually good news." Ethan looked at him. "Explain that." "He's scared," Corbin said. 6 years of patient strategy, and he just threw a defamation suit at a ranch couple who have been quietly gathering evidence for 6 weeks. That is not the move of a man who believes his position is secure. He looked at Clara. "What did you do to him?" She thought about Eleanor Marsh, about Thomas Greer, about the 3 other people she had visited in the past 2 weeks, whose names she had not mentioned to anyone yet. "I talked to some neighbors," she said. Corbin looked at her steadily. "How many?" 7. "About what?" "About what they personally knew about Ethan Walker," she said. "What they had seen themselves. What they believed was true versus what they had been told to believe." Corbin was quiet for a moment. "The story in town is shifting," he said slowly. It wasn't a question. "A little," she said. "Enough for him to notice." Corbin leaned back in his chair. "He filed this suit to shut you down," he said. "To make the 2 of you afraid to speak to anyone publicly about anything. To make every conversation feel like it could become legal liability." He paused. "It's a pressure tactic." "Can he win?" Ethan asked. "Not if we file our counterclaim first," Corbin said. "Which I am prepared to do as soon as the bank subpoena comes back." He looked at both of them. "I need 2 more weeks. Can you hold for 2 more weeks without making any new moves?" Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Clara. "We can hold," Ethan said. The 2 weeks were the hardest of all of it. Because holding meant absorbing what was coming without returning it. The stories in town got worse before they got better. A letter appeared in the county weekly newspaper. A letter to the editor signed by a name neither of them recognized, which raised questions about the Walker Ranch's financial practices and suggested that new management had introduced uncertain business methods. Her name was in the letter, not directly, but clearly enough. Will brought it to her with barely contained fury. "We should respond," he said. "No," Clara said. "But people are reading it. And some of them will believe it, and some of them won't," Clara said. "Responding to a lie in the newspaper makes it look like the lie requires responding to. Sometimes silence is more powerful." Will stared at her. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," she said. "Give it time." She was less certain than she sounded. There were 2 nights during those 2 weeks when she lay awake until past midnight, not working, just existing in the dark, with the weight of it. The uncertainty. The knowledge that everything was moving in multiple directions at once, and she could not see all of them. On the second of those nights, she heard the quiet knock on her bedroom door. She sat up. "Clara." Ethan's voice low through the door. "I'm awake," she said. "I can hear you not sleeping." She almost smiled despite herself. "Come in," she said. He opened the door and stood in the frame, not coming in just there, the way he was careful about everything. He was dressed, which meant he hadn't slept either. "You're thinking about your father's letter," he said. She was. She had been for an hour, not because of what it meant for the case, but because of what it meant that her father, who had been the person she had trusted most completely, who had built the ranch she grew up on, who had taught her to ride and to keep accounts and to stand straight, had made a decision about her life and not told her. Had decided she was an asset to be arranged. She hadn't said any of this to Ethan. She had kept that part compartmentalized in the section of herself that she managed to keep private and functional, even when everything else was in motion. But she had been lying in the dark thinking about it for an hour, and apparently he had heard that. He brought a chair from the hallway. He set it inside the door. He sat down. He did not tell her it was fine. He did not tell her her father must have had good reasons. He did not try to wrap it in something bearable. He said, "Tell me about him, your father, before all this." So she did. She talked for almost an hour. About her father as he was before the debts, before the pressure, before the desperation that had clearly driven him to choices she was only now understanding. She talked about the ranch she had grown up on, smaller and simpler than Walkerland, but hers genuinely, hers in the way that a childhood home becomes part of the body. She talked about her mother who had died when Clara was 19, and about how the absence of her had changed her father in ways neither of them had known how to name. She talked about the slow way everything had come apart, not all at once, but piece by piece, the way erosion works invisible until suddenly the ground shifts under you. Ethan listened. He asked one or two questions, quiet ones, the kind that open a subject rather than close it. At some point she stopped talking, and they sat in companionable silence, and she realized she felt lighter than she had in weeks. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive him," she said finally, about her father. "You don't have to decide that now," Ethan said. "No," she agreed. "I don't." A silence. "Ethan," she said. "Yes." "When this is over," she stopped. "When this is over," he said carefully. "What?" She looked across the dark room at him, at this man who sat with her in the middle of the night because he heard her not sleeping, who had never asked her for anything she hadn't offered first, who carried 6 years of unfair weight without letting it make him small. "I want to stay," she said. It came out simple, clean, the simplest true thing she had said in months. Ethan held her gaze. "You don't have to say that now," he said. His voice was very even, but she could hear what was underneath it. "I know I don't," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true, not because it's a good time." The silence that followed was the best silence she had known in this house. "All right," he said. Just that, 2 words. But they held everything. Corbin sent a message on day 12. The bank records had arrived. He wanted them at his office at 7 in the morning. Clara had the horses saddled before 6. They rode into Millhaven in the early morning cold, just the two of them, and Clara noticed that the people they passed on the main road looked at them differently than they had 3 months ago. Some of the old wariness was still there, but some faces were simply faces now. Not judgments, not performed distance. Something was shifting, slowly, but shifting. Corbin spread the bank records on his desk. The original appraisal for the Ellison property. The one produced by the bank Whitlock sat on the board of. Compared against 2 independent valuations from other counties for comparable land sold in the same season. The difference was staggering. The bank's appraisal had valued the Ellison land at less than 60% of its actual market worth, which meant that when Ellison's brother had accepted what seemed like the best available offer, he had been systematically underpaid by an amount that represented. Clara calculated it in her head, nearly 6 years of operating income for a small ranch. "He didn't just take the land," Clara said. "No," Corbin said. "He stole from a dying man's estate." "With the bank's cooperation." "With the bank's active participation," Corbin said. "The appraiser is employed by the bank. The bank's board includes Whitlock. This is not a coincidence. This is a mechanism." Ethan had not spoken since they sat down. Clara looked at him. His face was doing something she hadn't seen before. Not anger exactly. Something older and more specific. The expression of a man who had known for years that something wrong had happened to people he tried to help, and who was only now holding the proof of exactly how wrong. "James Ellison," he said. "He died thinking I had wronged his family." "Yes," Corbin said quietly. "He died believing a lie that Whitlock put in his head." "Yes." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Margaret Ellison," he said. "His daughter. She moved to Billings after the sale." "We can find her," Corbin said carefully. Can you? Ethan said. If you want me to. I want her to know the truth, Ethan said. Whatever else happens, whatever the case does or doesn't accomplish, I want her to know what actually happened to her family. Clara reached across the desk without thinking and put her hand on Ethan's arm. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. File the counterclaim, Ethan said to Corbin. Everything. The boundary frauds, the manufactured debts, the Ellison appraisal, the Henderson invoices, the defamation suit as evidence of retaliatory pattern. He looked at the documents spread across the desk. All of it. Corbin was already reaching for his pen. There's one more thing, Clara said. Both men looked at her. She had been thinking about this for 2 days, turning it over, examining it from every angle. It was risky. Corbin would probably argue against it, but she had sat at enough kitchen tables in this county over the past weeks to know something that the legal documents could not capture. The town needs to hear this, she said. Not just a courtroom. The people here, the ones who've been living under this for years without understanding what they were living under, they need to hear it. Corbin frowned. A public statement before the case is heard creates exposure. I'm not talking about a statement, Clara said. I'm talking about giving people the chance to speak for themselves. She looked at Ethan. Eleanor Marsh's brother, the medical bills you paid. He's never told that story publicly because he didn't think anyone would believe it. Thomas Greer has 3 years of honest business with you, and nobody knows that except him. She paused. The family's Whitlock damaged, they've been isolated, each one thinking they were alone. What if they knew they weren't? The room was quiet. You're talking about bringing them together, Ethan said slowly. I'm talking about letting them find each other, Clara said. We don't have to organize anything formally. We just have to stop keeping the truth in private rooms. She looked at Corbin. You said the pattern is familiar. You've seen it in other counties. Are there other families? Corbin looked at her for a long moment. 4 that I'm aware of, he said carefully. Can you reach them? Another pause. Yes, he said. Clara sat back. The counterclaim would handle the legal case. But the legal case was only one part of what Charles Whitlock had built. He had built a world in which people were afraid and isolated and convinced that nothing could be done. He had maintained that world for years through control of information, who knew what, who was allowed to say it, who would be believed if they did. The only thing that dismantled that kind of world was the same thing that built it. People, talking to each other, refusing to be alone with what they knew. File the counterclaim Tuesday, Clara said. Give me until Monday with the families. Corbin looked at her. You're not a lawyer, he said. No, she said. I'm better than a lawyer right now. I'm a woman nobody expected to be a problem. Corbin was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, Monday. And Clara Whitmore Walker, who had arrived in Montana with 1 suitcase and a marriage document she'd never wanted to sign, went home to start making the calls that Charles Whitlock had never thought to prepare for. Because he had spent 6 years watching Ethan Walker. He had never once watched her. And that was the mistake that was going to cost him everything. She started with Eleanor Marsh. Not because Eleanor was the easiest call, but because she was the most honest person Clara had met in Millhaven, and honesty was what this required. Clara rode out on Saturday morning with the cold coming off the mountains in waves, and her mind already organized into what she needed to say and what she needed to listen for. Eleanor opened the door before Clara knocked. She had been watching from the window. I heard Corbin filed something, Eleanor said. He's filing Tuesday, Clara said. I need Monday first. She told Eleanor what she needed. Not a performance, not a public statement, not anything that would feel like politics or theater. Just people who knew the truth sitting in the same room together for the first time. People who had each been carrying pieces of the same story without knowing the others existed. Eleanor was quiet through all of it. Then she said, Ruth Harmon. Clara looked at her. The Harmon family lost their property 4 years ago, Eleanor said. Ruth Harmon is living with her sister in town now. She never talks about it, but she knows things. She paused. And there's a man named Davies. Edward Davies. He worked at the bank 3 years ago as a junior clerk. He left under circumstances nobody ever explained publicly. She looked at Clara directly. I always thought he knew something. Can you reach them? Clara said. By Sunday, Eleanor said. She was already reaching for her coat. Clara rode home faster than she came. Corbin provided the contact for 2 of the 4 families from other counties. One was a woman named Sarah Pruitt, whose husband's cattle operation had been systematically undercut by Whitlock's feed supply manipulation 2 years before the same tactic appeared in the Walker Ranch accounts. The other was an older man, Frank Donnelly, who had lost a timber lease through a county records dispute that bore the same fingerprints as the boundary claims against Ethan. Clara wrote to both of them that afternoon. She did not write long letters. She wrote the essential truth in the fewest possible words, and asked them one question. Would they be willing to speak to a lawyer and to others who had experienced the same pattern? She gave them until Sunday to respond. Ethan watched her work through the afternoon without interrupting. He brought her coffee at 3 o'clock and set it at her elbow without comment. At 5 o'clock, when she put down the pen and pressed her hands flat on the table to steady them, because her hands were shaking slightly, which happened sometimes when she had been concentrating at high intensity for too long, he noticed that too. You've been going since 6 this morning, he said. I know. Clara. She looked up. Eat something, he said. It was such a simple human instruction that she almost laughed. In the middle of building the most important thing she had ever attempted to build, this man was worried about whether she had eaten. In a minute, she said. Now, he said. She pushed back from the table. Martha had left a plate covered with a cloth. She always did whenever she sensed that Clara was going to forget to stop working. Clara ate without really tasting anything, but she ate, and Ethan sat across from her and drank his coffee and didn't talk, which was exactly right. What happens if some of them don't come? She said. Some of them won't come, Ethan said. Fear is a long habit. You don't break it in 2 days. I know. But if the number is too small, the number doesn't have to be large, he said. It just has to be real. He set down his cup. One person standing up and telling the truth publicly is more powerful than 100 people knowing it privately. That's something that Locke understands better than anyone. It's how he built what he built. Ethan looked at her. You're using his own logic against him. She thought about that. My father used to say that the truth is always there, she said. It just needs someone willing to carry it in the open. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Your father was right about some things, he said carefully. It was the most generous thing he could have said about a man whose choices had hurt both of them. Clara looked at her plate. Yes, she said. He was. The responses came faster than she expected. By Saturday evening, Eleanor had confirmed Eleanor Marsh Ruth Harmon and a retired county surveyor named Albert Cross, who had, it turned out, been asked 4 years ago to falsify boundary measurements and had refused and been quietly pushed out of his position 6 months later. He had never told anyone why he left. He had been waiting. He wrote in a shaking hand in the note Eleanor brought for someone to ask. By Sunday morning, Sarah Pruitt had written back. She was coming from Billings. She would arrive Monday before noon. Frank Donnelly sent a telegram. 3 words. Tell me when. And then, on Sunday afternoon, a name Clara had not expected. The note was delivered by a boy she didn't recognize riding a horse that had come a long way fast. The note said, I heard you are gathering people who know what Whitlock did. My name is Margaret Ellison. I am James Ellison's daughter. I have been waiting 3 years for this. Tell me where to come. Clara read it standing at the gate where it was delivered. She read it twice. Then she pressed it against her chest for a moment with her eyes closed. Margaret Ellison, the woman whose father had died believing Ethan Walker had wronged his family. The woman Whitlock had used as a weapon against Ethan's reputation for years. The woman Ethan had said in Corbin's office with a quiet devastation that Clara still thought about, that he wanted to know the truth. She walked into the barn where Ethan was working. She handed him the note without saying anything. She watched him read it. His hands went completely still. He read it again. Then he set it down on the stall rail, and he put both hands flat on the wood, and he stood there for a moment with his head down, and Clara understood that what she was watching was a man absorbing something he had been carrying for 3 years. Guilt grief. The specific weight of being unable to clear your name to someone who deserved the truth finally beginning to lift. She did not say anything. She did not move. She let him have it. After a long moment, he looked up. "She's coming," he said. "Yes," Clara said. He straightened. He picked up the note. He folded it and put it in his pocket. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "Be there Monday," she said. "Be exactly who you are, that's all." They gathered Monday morning in Eleanor Marsh's house, which was the largest private home available, and which felt from the moment people began arriving like something that had needed to happen for a very long time. Ruth Harmon came first. She was a small woman in her late 50s, with the careful, self-contained expression of someone who has been through something large and has organized herself tightly around the experience to stay functional. She shook Clara's hand and said almost nothing, but she sat down and she stayed. Albert Cross came next. He was older 70s, and he carried a leather case that turned out to contain 4 years' worth of personal records he had kept after leaving his county position, every conversation, every irregular request, every date and name. He had been keeping them in a case under his bed, he told Clara quietly, because he believed that someday someone would ask. Sarah Pruitt arrived from Billings with red eyes from a long journey, and the particular combination of exhaustion and determination that belongs to people who have driven themselves hard towards something they've believed in for too long. Frank Donnelly came with his son, a young man who said very little, but listened with his arms folded and his jaw set. And then at 10:30, a wagon came up Eleanor's road that nobody recognized. Margaret Ellison was 30 years old. She was taller than Clara had imagined, with her father's coloring and eyes that were both tired and very direct. She came in, she removed her coat, and she looked around the room until she found Ethan. She walked straight to him. Clara watched Ethan hold absolutely still, the same stillness he used when he was managing something large, as Margaret Ellison stopped 2 feet in front of him. "I believed what they said about you," she said. "No preamble. Just the truth, direct and clean." "I know," Ethan said. "I let my father die believing it." Her voice was steady but barely. "I know that too," he said. "I'm sorry I wasn't able to reach you before he wouldn't have listened," she said. "Not then. Whitlock had worked on him too long by the time you tried." She paused. "That's not on you. I understand that now." She looked at him with those direct, tired eyes. "I should have said that to you 3 years ago." Ethan shook his head slightly. "You couldn't have known." "No," she said. "But you could have run. A lot of men would have. Left the county, sold the land, started somewhere else." She held his gaze. "You didn't." "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." Margaret Ellison straightened. "Then let's finish it," she said. What happened in Eleanor Marsh's house over the next 3 hours was not dramatic in the way that courtrooms are dramatic or confrontations are dramatic. It was the drama of ordinary people telling the truth in sequence. Albert Cross laid out his records and walked through them methodically. The requests made the responses, he gave the pressure that followed his refusals. The room listened without interrupting. What became clear piece by piece was a picture of how Whitlock's operation worked at the county level, not through overt criminality, but through accumulated pressure on individuals who were isolated from each other and never saw the full pattern. Ruth Harmon talked about the Harmon family's property loss. She had never told the full story publicly before, and the act of telling it in a room full of people who nodded because they recognized the same steps visibly changed something in her. The careful containment of her expression began to open. By the end, her voice was still steady, but she was not managing herself the same way she had been when she walked in. Sarah Pruitt described the feed supply manipulation and the way it had interacted with a sudden call-in of a bank loan that had previously been stable. The same bank, the same board member, the same mechanism that had appeared in the Walker Ranch accounts. Frank Donnelly said very little during the testimonies. But when Sarah Pruitt finished, he said, "That's the same bank that handled our timber lease dispute." He looked at his son. "Same loan officer." The room was quiet for a moment. Clara was sitting at the edge of the group, listening, taking careful notes. She had said almost nothing since the gathering began. This was not her moment to speak. But when Margaret Ellison spoke, Clara stopped writing. Margaret talked about her father not as a symbol, not as a legal case, but as a man. The specific way he had been broken down. The way Whitlock's stories had gotten into him and stayed there, feeding on the shame and the fear and the isolation, until he could no longer see clearly what was real and what had been put there by someone else. He stopped trusting people he should have trusted, Margaret said. That's what it did to him. Not just the money, not just the land. It took his ability to know who was for him. She paused. I watched him push away every person who tried to help because Whitlock had made him afraid to believe in help. She looked at Ethan. Including you. The room held the weight of that. Clara looked at Ethan's face. How was holding it the way he held everything steady, contained present. But she could see the cost. Corbin files tomorrow, she said quietly to the room. Everything you've shared today, if you're willing, becomes part of a documented pattern that his legal case will build on. You don't have to testify publicly unless you choose to. But your information matters. Each piece by itself is incomplete. Together. Together it's the whole picture, Eleanor Marsh said. Yes, Clara said. Albert Cross cleared his throat. I've been keeping those records for 4 years, he said. I'd like them to do something useful before I die. Quiet laughter moved around the room. The particular laughter that comes when people who have been tense for a very long time find a single moment of shared recognition. Frank Donnelly said, I'll testify, if it comes to that. His son, who had said nothing all morning, said, so will I. Sarah Pruitt said, I came from Billings. I didn't come this far to stay quiet. Ruth Harmon did not say anything for a moment. Everyone waited. She had the most to lose. Clara understood she was still in this county, still navigating the daily reality of Whitlock's presence. Then Ruth Harmon said, My husband built that ranch with 30 years of his life. I am not going to spend the next 30 years being afraid to say what happened to it. Clara wrote it all down. Corbin filed Tuesday morning. The counterclaim was 47 pages. Clara knew because she had read every page the night before. It named Charles Whitlock, personally named 2 of his holding companies, named the bank board member who had signed off on the Ellison appraisal, and named Henry Fitch, the county clerk, in connection with the altered boundary records. By Tuesday afternoon, Millhaven knew something had been filed. By Wednesday morning, the County Weekly had a reporter at Corbin's office. By Thursday, a second reporter had arrived from Helena. Clara heard about this through Will, who appeared to have appointed himself the household's intelligence service and seemed to find the entire situation enormously satisfying. The Helena man talked to Thomas Greer this morning. Will reported barely through the door. Greer told him about the business arrangement and how it had always been straight. He told him about the appraisal discrepancy too. Apparently he knew other families who'd used the same bank. Will was practically vibrating. He talked for almost an hour. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Clara. Thomas Greer, who had paid a bank draft the day after a single business conversation, had chosen his side. Good man, Ethan said quietly. The twist nobody had been prepared for came on Friday. Corbin came to the ranch in person, which he had not done since his first arrival. He came fast in a hired wagon, and his expression when he walked through the door was the expression of a man carrying information that is significant enough to require delivery in person. He sat down. He opened his case. He put a document on the table. Edward Davies, he said. The former bank clerk Eleanor Marsh mentioned. Clara straightened. He came to my office yesterday morning, Corbin said. He's been in correspondence with another county about a separate Whitlock matter for 6 months. He was waiting to see if there was a case large enough to make coming forward worth the risk. He paused. He brought the original internal bank documents from the Ellison appraisal. Silence. The originals, Ethan said. The originals, including the appraiser's initial assessment, which valued the land at full market rate, and the revised assessment that was substituted before the final paperwork was produced. Corbin looked at both of them. Two different valuations, same appraiser's signature, different numbers. The revision was signed off on at the board level. Clara felt the room shift under her. He falsified 2 documents, she said. With board approval, Corbin said. Which means Whitlock's exposure just expanded significantly beyond what we filed Tuesday. Ethan said nothing. He was looking at the document on the table, with the same expression he had used when he read the Corbin acceptance letter weeks ago, that enormous contained stillness. What does this mean for the case? Clara said. It means, Corbin said carefully, that what started as a civil counterclaim has the potential to become a criminal matter. The falsification of bank documents and the use of those documents in a property sale is fraud. The kind that county prosecutors take interest in. The room held that. Whitlock knows about Davies, Clara said. It wasn't a question. He will by end of week, Corbin said. Davies reaching me is not something that can be kept quiet. Then he'll move, she said. Yes. What kind of move? Settlement offer, Corbin said. A large one, fast, before the criminal exposure becomes too public to contain. He looked at both of them. It will look generous. It will be designed to look generous. And we say no, Ethan said. Corbin looked at him. This is your decision, Corbin said carefully. A settlement resolves the financial claims. It doesn't require public admission of wrongdoing. It doesn't restore anyone's reputation. It doesn't do anything for Margaret Ellison's father. He paused. But it ends the fight, quickly, without a long, expensive, publicly painful trial. Ethan turned and looked at Clara. She knew what he was asking. She thought about Ruth Harmon, who had stayed quiet for 4 years about her husband's ranch. She thought about Albert Cross and his case of records under the bed. She thought about Margaret Ellison, who had driven a long way to say the words she needed to say to a man she had wrongly blamed. She thought about her father, about what it cost to carry a story alone. If we settle, she said, Whitlock walks away intact. Everything he built in this county stays built. The next family he goes after has no precedent, no public record, nothing to point to. Ethan was watching her. No, she said. He turned back to Corbin. No settlement, he said. Corbin closed his case. All right, he said. Then we go to trial. The settlement offer arrived Saturday, delivered by Gerard Whitlock's lawyer, with the elaborate casualness of a man pretending not to be carrying something urgent. Clara took the envelope. She set it on the kitchen table. She did not open it. Ethan came in from outside and saw it there. From Whitlock, he said. I assume so, she said. I don't want to open it. He looked at her. Why not? Because the number inside is going to be large enough to be tempting, she said. And I don't want to be tempted right now. I want to stay clear. He looked at the envelope for a moment. Then he picked it up and took it to the stove. He put it in the fire without opening it. Clara watched it catch and burn. Neither of them said anything. She thought in that moment that she had never loved anyone the way she was beginning to love this man. Not the sudden theatrical love of stories. The kind that grows in the daily spaces in shared silence, in the decision to burn an envelope together without discussing it in the particular weight of 2 people choosing the same thing at the same time without needing to explain why. She did not say this out loud, but he was looking at her when she looked up and she thought he knew. Jong. The trial date was set for March. The weeks before it were the strangest Clara had experienced on the ranch, not because they were difficult, but because they were not. The impossible tension of the previous months had transformed into something that felt surprisingly like calm. The kind of calm that comes after a decision has been made, and all that remains is carrying it out. The town continued shifting. It shifted in the way that towns shift, not all at once, not dramatically, but in the accumulated small gestures of daily life. People who had avoided speaking to Ethan directly began nodding at him on the main road. The feed store owner gave Clara market rate pricing on a supply order without being asked. Eleanor Marsh introduced Clara to her sister-in-law as a woman you'd do well to know, which in Eleanor's currency was a significant endorsement. And one Tuesday afternoon, Old Pete stopped Clara outside the barn. This was his second unsolicited stop in their entire acquaintance. He looked at her with those sharp, weathered eyes. "The hands have been talking," he said. She waited. "We want you to know," he said, "that whatever happens in March, we're staying, all of us." He paused. "Thought you should know." He walked away before she could respond, which was fine. She wasn't sure she could have spoken anyway. The morning the trial opened in Helena, Clara wore the same dress she had worn to the meeting with Whitlock, her armor. She had pressed it herself again the night before, and she had done it methodically without hurry, thinking of everything that had happened since the last time she wore it. The distance between those two moments felt enormous and close at the same time. Ethan came into the kitchen while she was finishing her coffee, and he looked at her and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You're ready." "Yes," she said. "Are you?" He put on his hat. "Let's go," he said. Whitlock was in the courtroom when they arrived. He looked at Clara the way he had looked at her in the county solicitor's office months ago, that calm, measuring assessment. But something was different in it now. The recalibration she had seen then had deepened into something else. He had spent months preparing for this. She had spent months preparing for this. But he had spent those months fighting a version of the problem that no longer existed. He had been preparing to face Ethan Walker and a complaint about land disputes. He was facing something considerably larger. Corbin's opening was precise and devastating. He laid the pattern out chronologically, not starting with Walker Ranch, but starting with the earliest documented case building, forward through 6 years of manufactured pressure across multiple families, multiple counties, multiple mechanisms. He used Albert Cross's records. He used Sarah Pruitt's documentation. He used the Ellison appraisal documents that Edward Davies had carried out of that bank and kept for 3 years waiting for exactly this. By the time Corbin reached Walker Ranch, arriving at it as the most recent chapter in a long and documented history, the jury had already seen enough to understand that this was not a neighbor dispute or a business disagreement. This was a system, and Whitlock had built it. Margaret Ellison testified on the second day. She was the witness Clara watched most carefully because she was the one with the most to give and the most it had cost to come here. She spoke about her father with the steady, precise love of a daughter who has had time to grieve and has come out the other side of that grief, not smaller, but clearer. She described the years of pressure, the way Whitlock's stories about Ethan had entered her father's mind and displaced what he had actually known about the man. The way isolation had done its work on a good person until he could no longer recognize what was real. "My father died believing a lie," she said. "He died believing that a man who tried to help him had wronged him. That is what was taken from our family, not just the land, the truth." The courtroom was very quiet. Clara looked at the jury. She did not look at Whitlock. She did not need to. The verdict came on the 5th day. Clara was sitting beside Ethan when it was read. She had her hands in her lap folded. Still, she had learned that from him, the practice of stillness under pressure, and she felt him take a breath beside her when the foreman stood up. The finding on the primary fraud claim was in favor of the plaintiffs. The finding on the defamation counterclaim was in favor of the plaintiffs. The bank board member was referred for criminal investigation. Henry Fitch, the county clerk, was referred for criminal investigation, and Charles Whitlock was ordered to make financial restitution to 4 families across 3 counties at figures that Corbin had spent 6 weeks calculating and that represented for the first time actual accountability for 6 years of systematic theft. Clara heard it all in pieces, the way large things sometimes arrive not in one wave, but in a series, each one landing before the next. She felt Ethan's hand close around hers on the bench. She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, jaw-set eyes too bright. She squeezed his hand once. He did not look at her. He didn't have to. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the cold air came at them both immediately. People were talking Corbin, the family's will, who had somehow arrived with Eleanor Marsh in a wagon that had apparently set out from Millhaven before dawn, having decided the moment was too important to miss. Clara stood slightly apart for a moment, just breathing. She heard Ethan's boots on the steps behind her. He came and stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment, both of them, while the world rearranged itself around what had just happened. "My father's name," he said quietly. "He built that ranch. He spent his whole life on it and died without—" He stopped. "He'd have liked this." "Yes," she said. "He'd have liked you," he said. She looked at him. The cold morning air was around them, and behind them were voices and movement, and the beginning of whatever came next. "Ethan," she said. "Yes. Do you remember what you said to me the night I arrived?" He looked at her. "You said I was safe with you," she said. "I didn't believe you then. I wanted to, but I didn't know how." "I know," he said. "I believe you now," she said. "I want you to know that." He looked at her for a long moment. The man who had stood alone for 6 years, who had given a frightened woman his coat in a cold wind and asked for nothing back, who had held his walls high for so long that the simple act of putting them down had taken months of patience and silence and late nights at a kitchen table. He took her face in both his hands the way a man holds something he has not allowed himself to reach for, and was only now finally allowing himself to keep. "I know," he said again. But the words meant something different this time. He kissed her there on the steps of the Helena courthouse in front of Corbin and Eleanor Marsh, and a 14-year-old boy who would talk about it for years. And it was not the ending of something. It was the first honest beginning they had ever been given. Spring came to Walker Ranch. The way spring always comes to Montana. Grudgingly at first, then all at once, as though the land had been holding its breath, and finally decided to let go. The eastern fence line, which had been a source of legal dispute for months now, stood on ground that was unambiguously, legally permanently theirs. Old Pete had reinforced every post himself, working with the particular satisfaction of a man who has waited long enough for something to be settled. Ruth Harmon came to visit in April. She sat at the kitchen table where Clara had first found a payment that didn't make sense, and she drank Martha's coffee, and she talked without the careful containment she had worn at Eleanor Marsh's house. She was still building a future from what was left of the Harmon property. The restitution helped, Corbin's work helped, but rebuilding took time, and she knew it. "You started something," Ruth told Clara. "We all did," Clara said. "You started it," Ruth said simply. "The rest of us just finally had somewhere to put what we knew." Albert Cross wrote from the county seat that he had been offered his surveyor position back with apology. He had declined. He was 73 years old, and his knees were bad, and he preferred, he wrote, to spend the remaining useful years of his life doing exactly what he wanted. But he thanked Clara in terms that made her read the letter twice, and then set it down carefully, because there was no adequate response to being thanked for something that cost you less than it cost the person thanking you. Margaret Ellison stayed in touch. That was the one Clara had not expected, and the one that mattered most to Ethan, though he expressed it in the way he expressed most things that mattered to him, quietly through action rather than declaration. He arranged for the legal documents related to the Ellison land sale to be formally reviewed, and when the review confirmed what everyone already knew, that the land had been stolen from a grieving estate through fraudulent valuation, he made sure that Margaret received the full record. Not because the law required it, because she deserved to hold the truth of her father's story in her own hands. Margaret wrote him a letter in response. He read it in the barn alone. Clara did not ask what it said. But that evening at dinner, he was different in a way she could not quite name. Lighter was the closest word, though it wasn't exactly right. More like a man who has set down a weight he had been carrying for so long, he had stopped noticing how much it cost. On an evening in late May, with the mountains clear, and the light long, and the ranch settling into its evening sounds, Clara was sitting on the porch when Ethan came out and stood beside her. They had been married 8 months. It was not the marriage she had signed a document for. It was something that had built itself slowly, honestly, from the materials of what they actually were, rather than what the arrangement required them to be. He sat down beside her. They were quiet together, in the particular way they had developed comfortable full. The kind of silence that two people only reach when they have stopped needing words to fill the space between them. After a while he said, "You still think about leaving?" It was the first time he had asked that directly. She looked at him. "Do you still think I do?" she said. He considered it honestly the way he considered everything. "No," he said. "But I wanted to ask." "No," she said. "I don't." He nodded. "And you?" she said. "Do you still think I only stayed because I had nowhere else to go?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and looked at her, this man who had been so careful for so long, who had kept his distance with such discipline, who had trusted her with the thing most people in his life had never been trusted with, the undefended truth of who he actually was. "No," he said. "I know why you stayed." "Tell me," she said. "Because you're the kind of person," he said, "who finishes what she starts, who doesn't walk away from something just because it's hard." He held her gaze. "And because somewhere in the middle of the hardest winter either of us had ever been through, you decided I was worth choosing." She looked at this man. She thought about the girl who had arrived at a train station holding a suitcase and a document she never wanted to sign, who had spent the whole journey preparing herself for something cold and dangerous and wrong. She thought about everything that had been built since then, not in spite of the difficulty, but through it. She took his hand. "You were always worth choosing," she said. "It just took you a little while to believe it." He turned her hand over in his and held it the way he held everything that mattered to him, firmly, carefully, with no intention of letting go. The sun finished going down. The ranch went quiet around them. And Clara Whitmore Walker, who had arrived in Montana with nothing but a worn suitcase and the stubborn belief that she was not done yet, sat in the evening dark beside the most misunderstood man in the territory, and understood something that she would carry for the rest of her life. She had not come to Montana to be rescued. She had come to find out what she was capable of. And what she had found in the middle of all of it was this: a man who had never needed saving, only someone willing to stand beside him long enough for the truth to have room to breathe. She had done that. They had done that. And the life they were building now, not from the document they signed, not from the arrangement that brought them here, but from every honest choice they had made since, was entirely, completely, irrevocably theirs. That was enough.